Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Kristine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined us. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required to make it to the top, this podcast is for you. This season, I'm joined by Nicole Gates, a seasoned leader and incredible friend. We're going to agree, challenge each other, and maybe spill some secrets. So put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. Momentum is more than emotion. It's an emotion that forces us to engage teams, drive progress, and fuel success. Momentum builds over time as you work towards your goal. It's the sense of forward motion and accomplishment that propels you toward further success. But momentum is more than just an emotion. It's a self-reinforcing cycle where small accomplishments build confidence and motivation, leading you to more and more success. Most importantly, it strengthens your belief that something is possible. It puts you in a mindset conducive to achieving your goals. When I reflect on my own life, I crave momentum. When I'm on a daily habit of writing, I am supercharged. But then I let life, the emergent, non-emergencies get in the way. So Nicole, how do we sustain momentum? When have you found a time in your life where you've seen it slip? Or maybe a time in your life where you're wondering if it's slipping?
Yesterday. So I have a bi-weekly staff meeting that goes 2 levels lower in my organization. So it encompasses all of the program managers, probably 47-ish people on the Zoom call. Zoom, mind you, I said Zoom. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, I'm doing the staff meeting. We talk about HR and timelines and milestones and actions and government affairs and finance and exciting topics. And all of a sudden, I realized that 42 of my 47 people were off camera, really not paying attention, not engaging. And this is a high-performing team. We've been knocking those cultural survey scores out of the park. But momentum as a team clearly had stopped at my staff meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I said to everyone, I said, hey, this is what I've noticed. If it's not value add to what you're doing in your day, I need to change the topics, change the time, change the frequency. I'm going to do it because this is not the outcome that I want, as a group and how we spend our time. That's not that frequent and it's valuable. So please send me a note afterwards and give me your thought. So everyone taken aback, right? They quickly,
we got caught out.
I know by the boss, and they quickly send me a Teams message or email or text, and almost to a T, I received, "You're right. I was off camera because I was multitasking, but I really, really like what you say. And I love the frequency. I think it's valuable. I just like listening to you in the background while I do my work."
To notice if there's anything that's actually of value to me while you're talking.
And in some ways that was almost worse, right? That was almost worse because now I realized that the momentum of the organization and where we were going and the energy that was behind it has stagnated.
Let me feed that back to you. So you're hearing from your folks that the frequency is good, the timing is not a problem, the content is actually valuable.
Yes.
But their desire to kind of keep working and keep getting things done sort of overrides their willingness to sort of sit and just sort of listen for the things that could actually be truly valuable to them.
Exactly. They were perfectly comfortable getting fed information without having to produce information or produce anything.
So in our last episode, we talked about sort of feedback and advice and all of that. Are you open for some advice?
Yes. Kind of. Yes.
Kind of.
Yes.
Kind of.
Absolutely. Say
I
yes.
love it.
Yes.
Say yes. Okay. I'm on a board where I have been complaining to my husband a little bit about the fact that I feel like I'm just read out to at the board. And I don't know that I'm adding the kind of value I need. And I'm getting some good information and I need to, sort of pay attention. But I'm probably sitting in the place of some of the folks that are there being like, okay, got a lot on my plate. I'll just kind of like lend an ear while I lend most of my brain to what's on my computer. So one idea, and I'd love to sort of flesh this out to you when it comes to momentum, because momentum is this idea that sometimes something that's worked for a while, and it probably sounds like what you've been doing has been working for a while. It just needs a little bit of a disruption and it needs to be rethought. And I think what you've done is you've become your worst enemy in this working for you. So in the beginning, what they were learning from you was at such a clip and so impactful to what they were doing that they needed to spend time. They needed to be on camera. They needed to like really focus on what you're doing. But you've created people that are a lot more capable. You've created people that maybe in some ways know some of what you're going to say or even can anticipate some of the things you're doing because you're creating in them better leads, better employees.
All true statements, I think.
Oh, of course. Of course. So what if the disruption to the momentum, which restarts your momentum, is in some way an engagement during your presentation? So what if it is while you're speaking, there are some things that you would like to know from that team that you could do as a poll question, for example. So during the Zoom, you ask a few questions and people need to have been listening to what they're saying. But it's not just a catch-ya. It's actually you need to know this information in order to be able to manage this team better or be able to put together your proposals better, or whatever it is that you do for your job, Nicole.
And how would you measure success?
Starting with, do people stay on camera? Are people engaged in the questions that you're asking them? And does that spawn additional feedback to you after these calls? So because you're starting to ask these questions, do they want to know the answers? Like if you've got a poll question on, you're doing a readout on the market in which you're looking to enter into, but you've got some questions about what they're seeing on the ground or where you see your competitors lining up, or, even questions about, we were all at this conference or we all just saw this meeting. Do you feel like this consulting firm is getting a lot cozier with our potential client than you'd seen before? And so I think you measure success by, first and foremost, the thing that you noticed, which is people going off camera. But secondly, is it starting to create the kind of conversations that you probably had in the beginning, but you weren't even noticing you weren't having anymore?
You're exactly right.
Oh, good.
No,
fantastic.
And sometimes I'm sure it was incremental,
right,
over the last couple of months, but kept going until it got to that turn point where it was just, whoa.
Right, because that's what momentum is, right? Momentum is this emotional energy, this excitement that spreads through a team, through an organization. And by you coming in and doing it, you saw that momentum. You get this feeling of progress, achievement, possibility. What we start to see is stagnation. And stagnation is harder to see than the excitement that we started with, right? Like you see little bit of tipping points. You see a little bit of the conversations that you once had, the emails that you were getting, even your ideas for what you're talking about don't come as quickly to you. I think those are all signs that you've started to lose the momentum. And I bet you, if you look back over the last few months, you'll start to see that there were those signs. But your big tipping point was, of course, just seeing everybody's names in white on the black backgrounds, right?
You're going to make me really reflective on my drive back today.
I hope so. I hope we're reflective for everybody, right?
And then I have to think about my disruption.
That's right.
To create curiosity and therefore the momentum to make positive change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And And like I said, I think you're starting to grow these leaders. Who are some of them that can start experiencing what you're experiencing? Like who is it that can start maybe doing some of these presentations, and you've got a guest speaker that's like, oh, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. And by preparing them to do it, you obviously do the job of raising your leaders.
Yes. And I'm almost curious to see, if I purposefully hold back a little bit, who is going to step forward.
So as we talk about momentum, I mean, that's such a good example of a strong leader coming in, creating a momentum on a team. Now we start to see some stagnation, so we need a disruption in our momentum to sort of revitalize our momentum. What does momentum look like if you're not a strong leader?
Why are you asking me that question? Why would I know that?
Oh,
are
come
you
on.
suggesting something?
Okay, I will take it, because I'm sure there's times in my life where I have not been a strong leader, and I can tell you exactly what happens to momentum when you're not a strong leader. I think there have been times where I have come into situations, and I'm actually thinking of one very specifically back in my early days, where I had to absorb a team, and they were good at what they did. They had strong momentum, and I looked super capable as a leader for them, right? Actually knew very little about what they did. I came in with not a subject matter expertise that was important. As most of our listeners know, I have an engineering background and came into finance a little bit by accident. So in that case, that team that had been added to me, I actually looked good because of the momentum that team had. And it wasn't until it was left to my own devices where I realized that I hadn't set up some of the systems, that I hadn't re-engaged that momentum, that things started to crack, that there was a lot more sort of discontent with our approach going forward because I hadn't sort of absorbed that momentum as my own.
Interesting. And you bring up an important point, because positive momentum can give a new leader time to acclimate and time to catch up. It can also mask poor leadership because that organization is humming, and you bring in a poor leader and nobody's going to know, right?
Right.
So it can kind of reflect both ways.
And I guess I would just react to the poor leader. I think I showed poor leadership skills in that moment, but I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I did get the
those moments,
back
Kristine.
on track. Oh, I don't know, Nicole. I think you were sort of signaling me out. No,
never.
It's no, but you're exactly right. I do think the momentum can hide both a good leader that's sort of, doing all the right things, and so therefore they've got good momentum, but it can also, mask a bad leader. I think it can also, you can come into a time of disruption where the momentum changes. And if you think about momentum as like, I don't know, I'm thinking like a bicycle, and we're just like pedaling along and things are moving. And now all of a sudden we want to stop, right? And so there's a brake being applied. And if we could actually pedal backwards, we would see a complete change in the momentum going backwards. If you take a snapshot of a great leader in that moment, they're going to look like a poor leader, right? You're going to have screeching noises. You're going to have a change in speed of the tire. You're going to have maybe some imbalance of the rider. So I think that momentum can both shield a bad leader and make them look good, but it can also, if we don't interpret it right, can make a good leader look bad.
Yeah, fair. Let's talk about the fragility of momentum. And being a writer, you recently put out a novella, We Know You Know. And in the story, you have a young leader just starting off their career. Clearly, momentum is behind her. Good wins, good tailwinds. And then there's a little bit of fragility, and there is a roadblock. And that momentum stopped. Talk to us about your story and how did you come up with it, and how does that tie back to the challenges of momentum and what to do when momentum slips.
Oh, this is so much fun. I love that you just read it. So I wrote We Know You Know because I have, this book coming out next year. And so many people were like, how would I even know if I like what you write? So anyway, I wrote it, first of all, to give some backstory to the kind of books that I write, but also to give people a taste of it. And I am fascinated by people in impactful tipping point places of their career and how they manage work-life balance, how they manage sort of the inputs and the outputs and the strain of, if it's in a novel, it's like fraud and, other nefarious actions of other people, but just the general stress that can go on a career. And you're exactly right. We've got the protagonist that, is sort of humming along, and then a disruption happens so fully to where she thinks she's going. And I think that those moments and what she did in the book, which was to say, I can ride over this rock in this bicycle analogy. I can ride over it. I can regain momentum. I can regain my balance, or I can take this opportunity to take a look at that rock in the road and find out if I'm actually headed in the right direction. And I think that's exactly what she did. She obviously had a lot to solve, and there was a lot of, issues in her life, but she also took this opportunity to sort of retune and say, am I actually living the calling that I'm meant to? Am I actually moving in the direction that I should? And I love that her self-questioning that changed entirely the trajectory of her life, right? She took that as an opportunity. And I feel like that is what we want to challenge all of our leaders, and certainly the listeners of our podcast, to say, recognize the momentum in your life, and then recognize those moments that show that it is fragile, that there can be disruptions, and should that disruption lead you in another direction. In a book, it makes for a fascinating read, right? Like it's exciting to see somebody struggle with it. But I think it's fascinating to us because we recognize the importance in our own lives of having to do it.
No, great. It really was a thrilling story. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We Know You Know by Kristine Delano.
Oh gosh. Yes.
So continuing along negative momentum, because oftentimes, clearly, as I alluded to with my staff meeting, you don't know it's slipping until it's gone. It reminds me of that lawnmower video.
Okay, so this is a little bit dated, but it just makes me laugh so much when I think about the kind of momentum that we get into, where, you sit down to do one little thing, like find a pair of shoes in a closet, and then all of a sudden your closet's clean. And in that case, momentum is fantastic. That's great, right? The other momentum is you sit down to play, one little game on your phone, and all of a sudden, time is slipped away, and you're, paying too much time, sorting cards or killing candy or whatever it is that people do.
Season 3, episode 15 of a show that you just started that morning.
Or that. Exactly. So this video that you mentioned, oh my gosh, it made me laugh so much. So there is an older man on a lawnmower, and there is a pile of video games and in his lawn, and he is just revving that lawnmower, and he's doing little tight circles, and he's ready to go.
It was definitely Dad.
It was definitely Dad. And then the other side of the lawn, trying to run toward his pile of video games, is this 20-something slacker who's screaming at his dad, don't do it. This is the only thing I'm good at. Obviously, he had found a lot of momentum with playing video games, and his dad had it. He's like, get a job. And the guy's like, but this is the only thing I'm good at. And you could see the momentum that he had built in his life, sitting in a basement, playing these video games. And the next thing you know it, the dad is turned from that tight circle and just goes right over that pile of video games. And there's fractures of video games going everywhere, and the poor young man is screaming for his life. I mean, seriously, like top of his lungs.
He was traumatized that
He was
day.
very traumatized. He was very traumatized. So I think the lesson for me in that is, what are some of the momentums in our lives that are good momentum, and what are some of them that we need to drive a lawnmower over? So Nicole, do you have any thoughts of this in terms of, we've talked a lot about teams, individuals. What about companies that are looking at momentum?
I think it brings up the point that even the best strategies and models have a shelf life. And if you were to take Boeing, which is a national icon, considered a national asset, one of two airplane, developers in the world. They were basically a on the hill. Nothing could go wrong with Boeing, right? It was what everybody wanted to aspire to as a corporation, especially in aerospace. And they did things well. They were sending rockets into space. They were building planes. And all of a sudden, it seemed to happen pretty quickly. Everything really imploded. And
so I'm stopping you. So we're talking about Boeing. So for those of us that don't know a lot about this, give us an analogy of why Boeing and Tupperware are suffering the same defeat.
I think because once upon a time, they had fabulous strategies and fabulous products that everybody loved and everybody needed and everybody bought. Until somebody else developed something better that people wanted instead.
Right. So what's happening to Boeing right now? Like what do you see with their momentum?
Well, there's this upstart called SpaceX, led by Elon Musk, known as a disruptor, and they're now sending rockets up. They're landing them back on the pad, reusing them, willing to put satellites in space, lose a third of them on the way. That's a great lesson, right? They're not seeing it as, oh my gosh, I failed, everybody's fired. They're saying, oh, I learned something from that huge, massive, expensive failure, but they're getting better and better and better until, we've just changed the way that we put satellites and rockets into space. Boeing is, quite honestly, between their labor issues, their technology issues, their production issues, they've opened the door to Airbus. And so you have a national asset which is really struggling to even get things out the door.
They pivot. They
Pivoting
restructure.
Is hard
yeah.
when you're that big. And this goes back to momentum. When the bigger you are, it's almost the harder to regain momentum. So they probably started losing momentum a long time ago.
Right.
And now how do you regain it, right? And you have to affect leadership. You have to bring in new products. You have to maybe re-engineer how you're going to productize something. Right. Your labor workforce. And so it's not an easy solution. And that's what makes momentum so hard to restart, especially for those mega projects, mega orgs.
Right out of, actually, while I was in graduate school, one of the things that I ended up doing was going around to a lot of furniture manufacturers in North Carolina and doing ergonomic assessments of workstations and assembly lines and all of that. Again, engineering. It was sort of fascinating because it wasn't an area I knew anything about. I don't know anything about aerospace, and I don't know anything about furniture manufacturing. But what I noticed was some of the more successful companies, what they were doing was they were maximizing completely their space for manufacturing. So, you could really see how they had fine-tuned all of their lines to assure that the people and the machines and everything was all about the throughput of that. And they decided sometimes it was piecemeal, sometimes it was hourly. Like it was really something to behold. And then I saw this smaller manufacturer. They were definitely an upstart to them. They still hadn't kind of gained their momentum, but we went into their manufacturing facility, and I would say about 70% of it was exactly that. It was like really fine-tuned. They knew exactly what they were doing. And then other 30% of it looked like chaos. Okay. So like there was something going on over here. There were people running around over here. There was a pile of stuff over here. And I was like, what's going on? Have you just not made it from what's going on in the 70% to encompass what's going on the other side. And they're like, no. Like, each one of these is a different way of exploring what we're doing here that's completely disruptive to what we're doing. And we're willing to like invest in it for a couple of weeks to a couple of months to figure out if that's going to change the way we're doing it. So we're innovating off to the side, and we're willing to take 30% of our space to do that because the rate of our adaptation, the rate of our evolution is changing our throughput to the bottom line in a substantial way. And I just thought, that's how companies succeed. That's
Absolutely.
How large companies that want to take 70% of their footprint and assure that we're driving this takes R&D, not just in like the research and the development, but takes R&D in terms of the loss factor. Like what SpaceX is doing by saying, you know, we're willing to like fail this many times in order to get great at the thing that we're known for.
Right.
And so I think companies, to their detriment, try to create momentum over 100% of their organization. I think you can really only create momentum in a portion of it that relates to how much you're willing to risk to be great.
I think you're onto something. So how do we take that down to the personal level, right? You as a leader or me as a leader, we're sitting there and we start to notice that my momentum has started to slow, or my team's momentum, or organizations. What are some tips that we can do to spark and kind of get us back on track? Little things.
Well, I think we go back to the beginning. We go back to your story that you were willing to share at the top of our episode and say that the very first thing is the evaluation and reimagination of what has potentially worked for a while, where we have had momentum, but we're willing to see the changing winds and say it is time to reimagine, to reevaluate. I also think that we always have to be willing to bring in new ideas, that we always have to be willing to say, even in times of high momentum, there may be another opportunity to change things up and to shift our momentum in a way that's sustainable and longer lasting.
In your experience, are those organizations that are performing well, or those teams that are performing well, open to those new ideas?
I think that's a direct relationship to how good their leader is, how confident and humble their leader is, right? And I think this tees us up really well to our next episode, is this balancing of accountability and safety. If you've got a team that is living too much in safety, so we've got great momentum, like we all really feel good about it, and we're just going to kind of sit in our comfort zone, I think that those teams, although they look very high performing, may not be high sustaining. And then I think that teams that are, highly accountable might not feel the opportunity to change because they don't have the confidence in their leader that they'll stand by them. What do you think?
Yes. And progress is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about continuous improvement and continuously challenging yourself and your teams to see how you can do things better.
And we will leave it at that. That is the challenge for this week, is to take a look around you and see what momentum can do for you. Thanks, Nicole.
Have a good one.
And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button, because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.